and salam. Welcome to Muslim Viewpoint, a new podcast series powered by American Muslim Today, a groundbreaking nonprofit digital newspaper which champions civic engagement. AMT informs and empowers the diverse voices of almost 30 million Muslims here in the U.S. and other Western countries. I'm Maya Gaylor, and today we have an interview with Lina Barkawi, who is a Tatreez practitioner, preservationist, and now an educator based in Brooklyn. She fell into the art form by way of her Panamanian mother, delved headfirst into creating a Palestinian thobe from scratch, and now focused on helping other Palestinian women do the same. Her objective is to help fellow Palestinians reclaim Palestinian tradition, celebrate the beauty of Palestinian Tatreez, create something truly unique and beautiful, and tell their story on your thobe. Tatreez is tied to Palestinian history and the ongoing fight for liberation. The history of the Israeli occupation has directly impacted how Tatreez is practiced, and she is drawn to returning back to indigenous practices as her own way of supporting Palestinian liberation. She spoke to our reporter, Meher Jan.
Yeah, absolutely. So, alaikum assalam. It's such a pleasure to be here. And anyone who wants to talk to me about Tatreez, I will make the time because it is my number one passion right now. So Tatreez is the Arabic word technically for embroidery. But a lot of people, when they hear the word Tatreez, they actually associate it specifically with Palestinian embroidery. And the reason for that is because Palestinian embroidery is quite unique compared to other forms of embroidery because we have this massive library that is known as being part of the Palestinian embroidery space that has documented for the last, over the last 100 years or so, the different motifs that Palestinians use in their embroidery. And so when you think about looking at Palestinian embroidery, it looks very similar. You can kind of identify Palestinian embroidery from other forms of embroidery. And I think that's kind of the reason the word Tatreez has been specifically linked to Palestinian embroidery as opposed to other forms.
All right. Okay. That sounds interesting. And you've talked about how this form of art is going to help. It helps in reclaiming the Palestinian traditions. So, how exactly are you focusing on that mission, that vision of yours? How is it going about?
Absolutely. So I guess the way I can best answer that is actually to take us a little bit back in time. So I did some research around Palestinian embroidery and looked over the past 100 or so years in terms of how it is practiced and how it is used. And when you go back to before the Nakba, so before 1948, when Palestinians were living in their original villages, the way that Tatreez was practiced was very much by the women in those villages, and it was done for themselves. So this wasn't something that was really popular to sell, for example. And this was also before the popular use of machine embroidery as well. And so pre-1948, the Palestinian tradition of embroidery was to do it by hand and for yourself. And so that was, in my personal opinion, that was stripped away due to the Nakba. So when the Nakba happened, all of these Palestinians were forcibly displaced, and we found that there were a lot of women who were looking for ways to provide for their families, and they had been stripped from their land, which had been, a lot of times where they were finding their I guess, quote unquote, income, not necessarily in the same way that we think about income today, but that was how they were making things work for their families. That was how they were feeding their families. And so when they were removed from their land, you saw that they were looking for alternative ways to support their families while being a refugee. And they turned to embroidery because that was a skill that they had, and it was something that people were willing to pay for. And so you saw this transition from the Palestinian embroidery being something that was done for yourself and in your free time and as a reflection of your own identity to being something that you offered as a product, and that was paid for and introduced basically capitalism into the Tatreez world. And so you saw this shift happen. And then over time, people began to learn that the Palestinian embroidery by hand takes a very long time. It's meant to be a slow process. And in order to meet the demand of people and get them Palestinian embroidery as quickly as possible, you see this emergence of more machine-made embroidery to help people have access to this art form in a faster and cheaper way. And so, as I'm someone who has practiced embroidery since I was young. I was maybe 12 or so when my mother taught me. My mother, who was not Palestinian, actually, she taught me how to embroider. And I didn't make the connection that there was this really rich embroidery practice as part of my other side of my heritage until a few years ago. And so that's when I started diving really deep. And so I already had kind of this, what is the word I'm looking for? I had this understanding of why it's important to do hand embroidery, because I had already been doing it. It was something that I valued. And so I went into this research as someone who values hand embroidery, and then learning all of this made me very upset, I guess, in a way, and very frustrated that this isn't something that everyone knows about. Because if Palestinians knew about this, if they knew about how unique their Palestinian embroidery traditions are, why wouldn't they want to pick up a needle and start doing it themselves, again, for themselves, not because they want to sell it? And so that was when I started kind of, my journey has evolved, over the years. And now my focus is to help basically other Palestinians in the diaspora who have been disconnected from their heritage in some form, in some way, get reconnected through the tool of Palestinian embroidery, because it is something that is so rooted in our heritage, our culture, our traditions, but also our connections to the land and our connections to each other as fellow Palestinians. And so that's kind of how everything kind of evolves. But that's, I guess, to answer your question.
Yeah, it does. It does beautifully. It does. Let's just talk about, obviously, as you said, you started embroidery and from a very young age, and then of course you didn't keep the craft to yourself, and you wanted to share it with the community. So, looking at the kind of strong community that you've already built in Brooklyn, I mean, from the time that you started till now, are you happy and satisfied with the kind of awareness you have been able to create?
Well, so I would say community actually for me has been built more, not necessarily locally specific to Brooklyn. So I feel like there's like a whole other conversation that we can go into, whereas, a lot of this also emerged during COVID. So before COVID, not many people were, like, I wasn't personally super aware of Tatreez. It wasn't something that I saw on social media. Maybe I wasn't looking for it, but it wasn't something that I noticed. And COVID, I think, enabled a lot of people to get curious about Tatreez, because it's something that you can do at home. It doesn't require you to be amongst other people, and it still kind of offers you this way to connect virtually. And so I feel like COVID actually helped build that community for me, like me as a member, and then me also as someone who is hopefully nurturing a bigger, broader Tatreez type of community. And so we used to start meeting, I started like noticing people having Instagram accounts. And that was, I think, when I created my own Instagram account that was dedicated to Tatreez, was during COVID. And so as we started finding each other online, we would connect virtually, and all of us are not in Brooklyn. That's like I was just very fortunate to have a couple of women who were kind of close by. One was in New Jersey, one is in Connecticut. And so we would meet every once in a while, but ultimately we were connecting with people all over the world. So I have Tatreez sisters, if you will, in California, in Australia, in Norway, and so many places in the world, and the Middle East, of course. So that's been kind of the community that has been built. And I think, it just goes to show the nature of the Palestinian experience in that, just in looking at that, we have been dispersed all over the world. The diaspora is a result of, a 75 plus year occupation. It's a result of the ongoing genocide. And so you can see that very clearly in just looking at this small subset of Palestinians. And that's kind of how the community has, that's where it's come from. And that's how it's kind of continuing to be built, is by making connections virtually.
Great, great. I really think it is, making a huge difference. I've been going through your Instagram account, and of course, I went through your podcast account as well. And you're the co-host of a podcast by the name Tatreez Talks. So, if you could, Lina, enlighten us on that, what exactly do you guys talk about? What kind of topics do you cover?
Yes, absolutely. So Tatreez Talk is a new baby of ours. We actually just launched this year in 2024. So I am co-hosting alongside one of my really good Tatreez friends. Her name is Amani. She's based in California and she runs a company called Min Amani Designs. She has fantastic designs and kits in case anyone is interested in learning more. And she, she came up with the idea and she reached out to me and she's like, hey, what do you think about doing a podcast on Tatreez?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, tell me more, an excuse to talk about Tatreez, really. And honestly, that was kind of what it started off as. It was this idea that we just wanted to basically document these incredible and what we consider to be very magical conversations. And it also just enables us to meet more Palestinian Tatreez artists around the world and learn more about how they are practicing, how they are embedding it into their own art, into their own forms of communications. And that's kind of what it's become. And then the other aspect of that I was thinking about when she messaged me and as she started describing to me her vision of Tatreez Talk, the thing that came up to my mind was like, how cool would it be to have something that has a Palestinian voice, a Palestinian narrative that you can listen to while you're stitching. And so that was kind of the other piece of it that I was really fascinated by was, I typically will listen to audiobooks or podcasts as I'm doing my stitching. And, I haven't heard a Palestinian voice in those scenarios. And so this was kind of an opportunity to not only talk to just really incredible artists and people who are doing really fascinating things with Tatreez, but it's also a way for us to help someone else continue their practice of Tatreez. Like if they can dedicate 45 minutes or so each week to their Tatreez practice, those projects are just going to be just incredible. We'll see a huge, I guess, view of so many different art and so many different projects that we wouldn't have otherwise if they didn't have that opportunity, that excuse to spend some time stitching. So we interview, like I said, Tatreez artists. We also just interview your average person who's just doing Tatreez for themselves. So we have some, they are artists in their own rights, but they're maybe not necessarily with a huge public presence. So, people who are just creating their thobe for their upcoming wedding, that's going to be that's going to be a podcast interview that we have coming soon. Someone who just loves giving Tatreez gifts as well. So talking to her about, who does she gift to and how does she design with that person in mind and put so much love and time and energy into this project that person will then remember for a very long time. So these are the types of individuals that we want to, have on the podcast. And we're super excited. It's been such a wonderful, I guess, launch, if you will. We've had 5 episodes. The 6th one is coming up this week. And every conversation just gives me in particular, I know Amani feels the same way, but it just gives us so much joy. And listening to the podcast again later is just like, oh my God, I love this art so much.
That's
Definitely.
beautiful. That is beautiful, Lina. That is. Okay, just one more thing. We were talking about how this art form is obviously playing a huge role in bringing Palestinians around the world together, to be able to communicate, to be able to remain, endorsed in your roots and to be able to appreciate it. But if you look at it from another perspective, that if you want to create a larger kind of emphasis and want people from different backgrounds to be able to understand the plight of Palestinians. Do you think that is something that your, talk show or your podcast or even just your, Instagram channel, it is? Do you think it's going to be able to achieve that, to be able to create clear misconceptions and be able to make everyone from different backgrounds understand what exactly is happening in Palestine is not something that just happened right now. And as you
Yeah.
said, it's like decades of history there. Do you feel like that you would be able to create that kind of a platform anytime soon when everyone from around the world is going to sit and listen and be able to understand through creativity, through art?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've had people already message me like saying, wow, I did not know that this type of experience even existed, just because they have like right now, I would say probably a lot of our listeners are either people who are familiar with Palestine, Palestinians themselves, of
Mm,
course, or people who really value embroidery. And a lot of these people who embroider are really, really curious about this beautiful form that they had no idea existed. Like I think nowadays globally, a lot of people in the embroidery space, they recognize Ukrainian embroidery. And so when things happened in Ukraine and Russia, that was a really big conversation that people were having in the embroidery space. And it made a lot of the people who work with embroidery
yeah.
feel empathy towards Ukrainians. And so now it's like, when we think about the Palestinian embroidery, a lot of people don't know that it exists. It's not something that is mainstream. It is not something that people really understand about. And it's also different from Ukrainian embroidery in that it's not just a identifiable type of embroidery, something that you can recognize as being Ukrainian.
Hmm.
It has a history that is really, really rooted in this fight for liberation, in this fight for freedom and justice in Palestine. Because if you look at the history from a Tatreez perspective, it
Yeah.
is very much embedded, and that comes out in all of the different conversations that we have. So, for example, like a lot of the people who will come onto our podcast, they will talk about how they wish that their grandmother could have taught them Tatreez, but she wasn't able to because of the occupation, or you hear about how Tatreez was used as a very direct form of resistance by Palestinians in the West Bank over different aggressions that have been conducted against Palestinians by Israel. So you have like the history is just so rich, just from a Tatreez perspective, and all of those types of stories are really hard to hear if you don't have some sort of platform to kind of
Yeah.
take them in a way that is you know easy to accessible, I guess, if you will. So that's what our hope is through the podcast. I mean, I think from like my own personal accounts perspective, I like to share all of the different designs that I do. My designs are influenced and inspired by the Palestinians that I am seeing, on the ground or in history or in my day-to-day life. And I think through that, art historically has always been a way of communicating past, these political debates that, typically only have one side of the conversation kind of present. And art is the way that you can actually, communicate that there is an entire other side. There is an entire people who have other lived experiences that matter in this particular debate. And so that is kind of my hope. So like my most recent design, for example, is it's a design of a watermelon, but within the watermelon has motifs from across historic Palestine. So the one of the reasons that the motifs are so unique is that you can trace them to their original villages, which a ton of them have been erased due to the creation of the Israeli state. And a lot of them are currently being erased due to occupation and due to settler colonialism. And so I intentionally put a series of motifs that spanned across historic Palestine to really showcase that we come from all of these different villages and they all matter. And the idea that they're in this watermelon, shape is this idea that, we are not free until we are all free. So this watermelon for me, and it has been something that has come out of the Palestinian resistance movement for the last few decades, is a representation and symbol of liberation, and a fight for, resistance against occupation. So yeah, I mean, 100%, I guess, is the short answer to your
Yeah,
question.
yeah, that was great. I just wanted to ask you, I mean, you're describing this and I'm just thinking about it in my mind. Okay, this is how she designed it. And as you said, motifs from all these different villages representing the different sides of Palestine. Wouldn't it be awesome, Lina, if you guys can actually host an exhibition or, an ongoing exhibition or something as such for people to actually come and see and feel the fabric and, just to
Mhm.
be able to glimpse at all these amazing creations. So, I mean, I would definitely, if you ever do have an exhibition, I'm going to be flying out to be in one of these because it definitely is going to create a lot of excitement and a lot of curiosity to be able to see that. So, hands
Absolutely.
off to you guys and your community members for doing something so meaningful in such a beautiful way. Obviously, the kind of crisis we are in right now, I don't know how people even sleep because every day is such a hard day to wake up to with the kind of news that we have to see and hear. So when it comes to Gaza's plight, which is continuously worsening, Lina, what is that nudge of hope or, a shimmer of hope that you have in you that makes you feel like, if you know what, better days are coming and Palestine will be free? How do you give yourself that kind of a boost every single day to be able to get up and do what you do?
Yeah. Yes, so it's a really, really good question. I mean, I think there are a few reminders that I continue to tell myself each day. One, me as a Palestinian just existing is a form of resistance. So even if it's a terrible day, even if I'm not in the mood, even if I'm getting angry at every single person at work, I am still being Palestinian just by being there. And that in of itself is a form of resistance as long as I identify as Palestinian. So like that's like the first one. The second one is I remember, early on in the aggression against Gaza, there was this really beautiful a very sad but very beautiful voice recording that was going viral. And it was this woman in Gaza who was talking to one of her family members who was outside of Gaza. And her family member was telling her, I'm so, like, I don't know what to do. I'm so sorry. Like, I don't know. I can't help you. Like, I want to help you. I please, like, what can we do? Give me something that I can do. And I thank every day that I'm not in that situation. And at the same time, my heart is breaking every single day because you're in that situation. Somebody's in that situation. And I think it was her grandmother. This woman responded to her and she's like, you know what? I'm so sorry that you're not here. I'm so sorry that you're on the outside having to witness this. And
Yeah.
so this like change in mindset, like she is thanking God that, that she is there in Gaza because she can't imagine what she would do if she was outside of Gaza. Like, what are we supposed to do
Yeah.
witnessing? It's the most awful feeling. That's not to say that I don't want anyone to be in any of these situations, of course, but it was just like this way of thinking that was so transformative for me as someone who has from a mindset of someone who has lived through these aggressions year after year. Like this is not the first time, as you know, and
Yeah.
like to have this kind of thinking and to have this much faith in your God and in the future and like what matters is so powerful. So that was like another thing. And the other thing I'll just mention because it's kind of fresh in my mind. I was listening to this podcast episode and it was featuring an indigenous person in Australia, actually. So she's not Palestinian at all, but they were talking about Palestine and how, it matters to every indigenous person out there. And the thing that she was talking about was, one of the things that she looks to when she's losing hope or when she's feeling restless or whatever, is she just literally goes outside and witnesses nature and thinks about who actually documents everything that happens in life. We as humans are so limited. Our life here is so limited, but the trees are here that live longer than us. They are the ones who are capturing everything. They will see this through to a free Palestine. It may not be in our lifetime. I hope it is, because I would love to witness that, but it may not be in our lifetime, but it will happen because that is the natural way of life. Things, the good will always overcome at some point. And so thinking about just like looking at nature and how insignificant, we are. And I think as Muslims, this is also something that we're taught as well as like, remember, like you are nothing. I mean, I don't mean that in a bad way, but like really we are so insignificant. And it's a reminder, that we will get there as a world, as a dunya. It's maybe not in our lifetime, but we will get there. And that, gives me some hope because all of the Palestinians who came before me have been fighting this. They have been pushing and they have been pushing. And to be in a moment when I still have access to all of that knowledge and I have access to all of that effort and that fight for liberation and that heart and faith in God, like that to me is just all I need to continue going, because I can then put my own mark as my own individual, in my limited time on this earth. And that's all we can do. At the end of the day, we are limited, we are insignificant, and we are human. So I think those are the things that I remind myself every day.
Thank you for joining us this week. Be sure to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at American Muslim Today. If you'd like to read more about this story and access more digital content, feel free to check out our website, AmericanMuslimToday.com. We'll see you next week on The Muslim Viewpoint.